Chapter 7 Review. Why did Americans take different paths in the early 1800s? So this is going to kind of go over the North and South differences and then growing sectional differences between the North and the South and even the West as well. Please be on Note Taking Study Guide, page 125. This is an overview of the entire chapter. The first thing is the North. The North economy would depend on industry. It had some important inventions such as the spinning jenny, the water frame, steam-powered textile plant, and this gave way to the factory system, which is basically the meeting of workers and machines in one place. And they worked. People moved from farming to urban areas to work these machines. Labor conditions were poor, and child and young women were often used as a labor force. Their society in the North was urbanization, so it was a growing urbanization, and this trend has continued to actually the modern day today. We continue to urbanize more than we do have rural. The growth of the cities is due to movement from rural to urban areas, and there were some problems: fires, poor sanitation, but there was also some positive things like steamboats, clipper ships, railroads. And so goods were actually be able to ship into these cities from distant markets. Immigration provided laborers for industry and caused a rapid growth in population. And most of the immigrants came from Ireland or Germany during this time period. In the South, the economy depended, unlike the North, it was industry. In the South, it depended on slavery. Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin increased the South's dependency on slavery. So you would think that an invention maybe would have relieved the slaves, but it actually made it more entrenched in the South. And cotton plantations were born because cotton became America's greatest source of wealth. We exported the most. We got the most wealth from cotton, and specifically the South got the most wealth. Society in the South was dominated by slave-owning large landowners. Most actually people in the South, by the time of the Civil War, didn't own slaves. The vast majority didn't. It was large landowners owned most of the slaves, but they also had most of the wealth. Slave codes gave slaves no rights and allowed every aspect of life to be controlled. Free African Americans were not allowed to vote. There were a few in the South, and they weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to serve in elections. They weren't allowed to serve on juries. They couldn't attend public school. They were discouraged from traveling. So it wasn't, even if you weren't a slave, you didn't have any rights. Growing sectional differences during this time period, and there were growing sectional differences, but the main kind of event that showed that was the Missouri Compromise. In 1820, Henry Clay proposed the Missouri Compromise, and this proposal involved that Maine would be admitted as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. Southerners weren't happy because Congress gave itself power to make laws regarding slavery, and Northerners weren't happy because Congress allowed slavery to expand into another state. So it didn't really please anybody, but really it postponed the eruption of a civil war for another 40 years.